Buckminster Fuller and soil. And for those who don't know me, I'm Amanda Joy. I'm Executive Director at Buckminster Fuller Institute. And we also have Jalen here.
Hi, and I'm a system designer here at Buckminster Fuller Institute. It's great to see some of you from Space Camp and other in Trim Tab and all these other awesome things happening.
Yeah, we also have Faye.
Hi everyone, good to see you all. I'm the Operations Director for the Buckminster Fuller Institute. If you don't know me yet, you'll soon know me.
And then we have Tom Chi, who's the board chair of Buckminster Fuller Institute, amongst other many roles. He just started a venture fund called At One, which is investing in technologies that enable humanity to be a net positive to nature. And he'll be our guest speaker today about regenerative agriculture. Thank you all for joining. Hi, Monique. Yeah, so we are just so excited this week to be convening these conversations around the Co-operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. It's a project that we've been working on kind of more behind the scenes at BFI for about 1.5 years now, and now bringing it into the public so that we can cooperate with a diverse set of folks who wants to come in and co-author this knowledge commons that will enable us to have better and clearer access to regenerative resources. So you can kind of think of it as a tool that enables us to see more signal out of the noise of many of the resources, whether that's articles or media or projects or people involved in various projects or various themes and topics like regenerative agriculture. So our first chapter was on blue carbon. We had an incredible session on Monday around that. And we'll be having these masterminds every month on the various chapters. So this is the kickoff for the regenerative agriculture chapter. We have some partners coming down the pike who are going to help us bring on more researchers and really enable this chapter and this work to flourish so that we can identify where in the regenerative agriculture industry are there white spaces, almost take like a venture studio approach of saying like what is actually really needed within this industry, and then say, you know, here are the projects that need to rise up out of it, and then try to find the players that can fill that. So that is kind of what we're doing here and kicking off today. And I think, hi Abe, great to see you. So we have some old hats in the regenerative agriculture sphere here, and I know other people are new to it, but I think we'll just kick it off with going into breakouts so that you can all meet one another. It's part of the idea of these masterminds is to connect the network to itself. Once the network knows itself better and the nodes are strengthened, or the connections between the nodes are strengthened, then we can be stronger as a movement. So we'll take 5 minutes now, and what was the question that we had come up with, Faith, for this?
So we just have a prompt question of what are the things or actions that have changed in the way that you relate to soil and food? And, you know, feel free to use that question or just meet each other for the 5 minutes that you have. But I think it's a great question to get us started. And you'll be in a group with 2 or 3 other people. So we look forward to hearing back from you after you get swept away into the land of breakout rooms. Go for it, Amanda.
Any highlights from those conversations you'd like to share? I enjoyed learning from Grace just about like the connection of when we eat things, in both directions. When we're eating things, we're also eating what they ate. And also when we eat things, it's the bacteria in us that eat those things, and then we kind of digest what those bacteria process. So just like thinking about food and soil and the whole exchange of flows, like in many ways out into the web. It's not as simple as you may think. Any other highlights?
We learned that Abe is amazing, and you got to ask him what he's done and talk to him about it.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Similarly, I would say that I also learned that Michael is pretty amazing and doing a lot of great stuff too. And I'm intrigued to see how we can integrate all of that in this mastermind and collaborate with that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. Excellent. Any other shares? All right, with that, I think I'll give a little bit more background on the cooperating manual. Faith, if you want to share that screen. Oops. I seem to have lost that other screen. There we are. Okay. So Buckminster Fuller Institute is embarking on an audacious project to create this cooperating manual for Spaceship Earth. So you can kind of think of it as a knowledge commons or a regenerative hive mind, the ability for all of us to kind of take those sparks and those interactions that we're often having just one-on-one in conversations and bringing them into a many-to-many format. So as regenerative agriculture continues to grow and more people are joining the movement, there's people doing total addressable market studies or other people doing a whole landscape review on financing regenerative agriculture in East Africa or whatever it would be. And the idea is to kind of have one collective place where we can track those things and be able to connect with one another. So it's inspired by Buckminster Fuller's Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, which was published in 1969 and was really a provocation about why don't we have a manual? And this is really meant to be an actual, action platform. At Buckminster Fuller Institute, we have a bias towards action, and we always like to learn to do things by learning by doing. And so here we are kind of building this manual out, and would love to have all of you collaborating with us on it, with regenerative agriculture as one of the first chapters. Go to the next slide. So probably don't need to share it with all of you here, but the time has perhaps never been more ripe for Buckminster Fuller's vision. Our friend likes to say that he seems to be the man of the 11th hour. A lot of the visions that he had are really ripe today. And I really like this rallying cry of, we are called to be architects of the future and not its victims. I think a lot of environmental messaging thus far has positioned us as, let's avoid that future that we don't want, and puts us into this kind of victimized role. And I think if we're able to step into this kind of preferred state, as Buckminster Fuller would call it, instead of just looking at the problems, let's look at what is preferred and walk towards the solutions that we want and deserve, then we can be architects rather than victims, and have that sense of control. Next slide. So the cooperating manual is really meant to be a doer's manual. It's not just research, but really taking that research into action. And it's this comprehensive and creatively taxonomized list of resources, enumerating and illuminating the positive visions of the future. And what we're playing around with for the taxonomy is to actually do these deep dives on specific chapters like blue carbon and regenerative agriculture, but then also to have another pool of resources that are coming in, which you all will be able to submit later in the session. And the idea is for it to create what's called a folksonomy. So it's a user-generated taxonomy that's by multiple users kind of tagging and doing multiple tagging systems with the resources that they're putting in. A taxonomy emerges out of that, out of the folks using it. So that's the kind of creativity part of the taxonomy, and we're all open for ideas and feedback on how to make that as cooperative as possible. There's a lot of conversations about governance and how can we create this wiki in a way that is really inspired by nature's designs and living systems principles. To the next slide. So Buckminster Fuller had the original design science decade in the 60s, and with that he had this incredible set of documents called the Inventory of World Resources, Human Trends and Needs. And so the cooperating manual is kind of a 2021 version of that, and instead of just a booklet, it's online, and right now it's in an Airtable format. Eventually it'll be in more of a kind of three-dimensional or zoomable user interface with like a forced directed graph, if you know what that is, which is like once you click on one resource, it'll kind of reorient what else is out there and show you what's creatively tagged in a similar fashion. And the idea is to open up all of these tools for folks. The Whole Earth Catalog is another inspiration for this, access to tools. How can we all take these conversations that are happening at the edges and bring them to the center and make it really easy for people to be onboarded as they want to pour their energy and resources into regenerating the planet. The next slide, you can see some of the things that Buckminster Fuller collected in the original documents, different ways of looking at the Earth's biosphere. Highly recommend looking through all the different documents that he created as inspiration for what we can co-create going forward. The next slide. So this is the very beginning. Like I said, we like to have a learning by doing approach. And so this is the very beginning of the cooperating manual. We have something like 250 entries now. We're trying to get to 1,000 by the end of the week. So please do enter your best resources in there and we will learn by doing, and we will have this folksonomy emerge as we do. So we have everything in here from Project Drawdown, which is my previous nonprofit that I founded, which is 100 different solutions to climate change, really mapping that it is possible to reverse global warming by about 2050. We have talks like this Everything is Connected talk by Tom Chi, other talks and people and different ways of understanding the world, like how whales can change climate, this really beautiful video about trophic cascades. So that's where we are now. You can find it all on the next slide, spaceshipearth.live website. And there you can see the prototype resource repository. You can go to the next slide, Faith. And then you can also see the your ability to add in a resource on the second part of that page. So we'll be doing that a little later. Spaceshipearth.live, yeah. And so we'll pass it back to Jalen, I think now, to let us know a little bit how we can get involved, how you all can get involved going forward.
Well, yeah, the high level is we can't cooperate without cooperators. So if you find this inspiring and want to mastermind with us more on a regular basis, feel free to join our overall BI5 membership, as well as it'll be awesome to see some of you in our members high-low as well, which is our online community where you'll be able to add tons of value and talk to other members in the community and really find other like-minded individuals who are very happy about carrying the torch. So also, if you haven't seen the cooperating manual or had the pleasure of checking out Blue Carbon, you can check that all out at the link in the chat or Spaceship Earth. spaceshipearth.live. And then the Blue Carbon manual is already there, as well as you can add more resources there as well. So now I think we pass it off to Tom.
Yeah, so it's a pleasure to introduce Tom Chi. He's the board chair of Buckminster Fuller Institute. He's co-founder of Google X and a brilliant polymath, kind of a real life Buckminster Fuller. He has worked in all sorts of different industries and has helped so many people kind of learn this rapid prototyping process of always helping people understand how to move from conjectures to actuals and really implement all of this theory about how to create a better world into action, and has helped so many people along the way. He's been a longtime mentor of many entrepreneurs, including many at the Unreasonable group. And yeah, we're just honored to have him as part of the BFI team. I'll just pass it over to you, Tom.
Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you for the introduction. What we're going to do is I'm going to give a talk about soil and soil regenerative agriculture, and then there's going to be a bunch of time where we can have questions and dialogue and kind of build off of some of the things that you guys are going to learn. And yeah, I'm just going to jump right into it. Share my screen. Actually, I pulled together 3 presentations, but I'm only going to show one because that's ridiculous. So here we go. All right, regenerative agriculture, understanding soil and its potential. And for a lot of folks, like people think about soil and like soil is dirt, right? Like, but yes, and also there's a lot of different lenses that you can bring to soil and our relationship to it. And really what I'd like to go through in this presentation is to kind of really nuance that out a bunch. So folks are coming from a more complete sensibility, a more multi-perspective and systemic sensibility of what soil is and does. So first off, you got to go understand, how dirt becomes soil. How it goes from the kind of abiotic substrate into something that is really rich and supportive of life. And what you're seeing on the image on the left is basically this is the main engine. Green plants in the soil uh, is the main engine of driving soil health and continued improvement and management of soil. And what exactly are green plants doing? Well, basically, you got light from the sun hitting the plants, photosynthesizing, and you can see all the different molecules that are involved here, and that generates these plant sugars. So you got some carbon dioxide and water, and it's emitting some oxygen. It's taking the sunlight. Net output is these little carbohydrate plant sugars. And that, of course, is used all throughout the plant to go build the body of the plant, but it also goes down into the roots. And there's part of what it does down there, which is really easy to explain, which is, oh, you're generating all these plant sugars. It's used to go and drive the metabolic processes in the plant. So it helps you grow leaves, it helps you grow roots. But one amazing capability that plants have developed is a type of symbiotic relationship with mycorrhizal and fungi inside of the soil, because basically the roots are a mechanism to be able to get resources for the plant that doesn't come from just air and light. And roots basically only extend so far away from the plant, but like the mycorrhizal structure that a root system, the roots of any plant might interface with, can be easily 10 times, oftentimes 100 times or more, actual volume that is reachable via the mycorrhizal extended network compared to what the plant could just get with its roots. Now, why is that so important? Well, that means that those mycorrhizals, because of their massive, surface area to volume and their huge, increase in reach and extent compared to the roots, the mycorrhizals are adjacent to a bunch of soil resources. So that might be, phosphorus or nitrogen or interesting things that the plant might need in various capacities. And this is all a lead into one of the most remarkable things that happens is this symbiotic relationship. The plants generate these plant sugars, and the mycorrhizal fungi actually want to have those plant sugars. And what the plants are able to do is they're able to take some of those plant sugars that are generated through photosynthesis, move them down into the roots, and basically exchange them with mycorrhizals and other microbes in the soil in order to ask those organisms to do things on their behalf. So a plant can actually go ask a mycorrhizal network to go hunt for a particular nutrient. And then when it gets that nutrient, it exchanges that nutrient for plant sugar, which is an amazing form of communication, which we are still learning more and more about. But broadly speaking, sunlight becomes photosynthesis, drives the creation of plant sugars, goes into this exchange system and through the roots of mycelia. And it's actually that exchange, which is the fundamental energy that drives the entire soil ecosystem. So every ecosystem, in order to survive, needs to have an ongoing flux of energy coming through it. And given that, a lot of the soil is under the surface and it does not have direct access to sunlight, then this is basically the main route that energy gets into the system and powers that entire ecosystem. All right. There's a bunch of other things to say about this, and that healthy soils are also better in terms of being able to hold water, making them more resistant to both droughts, and they're better for floods too. So it's a whole interesting long discussion I can get into about some of the physical properties here. But long story short, it's because these organisms in the soil are aerating and creating these different channels and aggregates of different sizes, and it's the variety of pore sizes which allow you to both drain soil efficiently in flooding conditions, as well as hold soil effectively in drought conditions. Because the small pores basically hold water for extended periods of time in droughts. The big pores allow, big floods and rainfalls to kind of sift through and get to lower parts of the water table. And healthy soil basically exhibits a wide range of these pores and aggregates. All right, now what happens when we are doing agriculture the way that we've been doing it? And I will broadly class the way that we've been doing agriculture as input intensive agriculture. Um, because if you guys have ever been to, a farm and you've seen them uh, put out all the fertilizer or spray everything with pesticides or herbicides for weed control or fungicides for fungi control, then yeah, those are all called agricultural inputs, and we typically expend a lot of money on agricultural inputs relative to production. Now, not only is that a thing that is expensive for the farmer and has some potential damage to human health. So things, herbicides like glyphosate, for example, are now well established and known to cause cancer. And Bayer has something like $3 billion of lawsuits against it, which it's likely to lose all of those lawsuits because they kind of knew it was cancerous. Um, so like, yeah, like besides the fact that there is some damage to input heavy agriculture in that we're putting chemistry on these plants that maybe we don't always want to eat or be around, then there's another, really unfortunate side effect for the soils, which is when you go and just give these plants nutrients directly via fertilizers and all these heavy inputs, then that actually becomes the majority way that they pick up nutrients. And they basically give up the game on exchanging plant sugars with the mycorrhizal environment, which basically starves the entire soil ecosystem. So not only are we spending a bunch of money putting some potentially dangerous chemistry. There's other chemistry which is fine. I don't want to paint it all with the same brushstroke, but we definitely do use a lot of chemistry, which is you should be wary of at least. Um, instead of doing all of that and killing this pathway to the health of the soil, like we could be looking at a different way, which is more like the first photo, sorry, the first slide, where we are basically building really healthy soils as we're growing everything that we're growing, which actually makes your land more valuable over time. Lots of additional benefits we can talk about. Anyway, but this is the reason why modern agriculture can be so damaging to soils. It basically cuts off the energy chain, which drives the entire soil ecosystem. All right, some other things that are maybe problematic about current way that we are doing agriculture is that it generates more than a quarter of global greenhouse gases. In fact, as large as the entire energy generation sector. So, when you think about wind and solar, hydro, other renewables kind of coming in and displacing things like coal power, fire power plants and natural gas peer plants, and I don't know, every sort of way that we have been just setting things on fire to make our energy. I think there's a lot of sense of like, oh, well, the whole kind of Green New Deal, the whole direction that we're moving as an economy, it's like, we just need to solve this energy generation problem. If we solve that, then we've solved emissions. No, that problem is 25% of emissions. And the way that we grew our food is 26% of emissions. So like, number one, you definitely haven't solved it just by solving all of that. You solved about a quarter of the problem. If every single bit of electricity generation on the planet was renewable, we'd solve about a quarter of the greenhouse gas problem. We need to go after, how we're producing our food, because that's another quarter of the greenhouse gas problem on the planet. Beyond the greenhouse gas impact, we're literally using 50% of the habitable land on the planet to grow our food. So that's really a lot of space, and it's the majority footprint of humanity on the planet. The actual built environment, like the actual spaces where we have roads and cities and all that sort of thing, where people are like, oh, we just become this hyper urban planet. No, that's less than 1% of the land surface of the earth. Like this is actually, agriculture is the major footprint of humanity on the earth. And it's basically at the 50% mark. And if we continue to grow our population to 10 billion people roughly by the year 2050, which we're on track to, then we're probably going to end up using about 75% of all of the habitable land on the planet to grow our food, which is also the major driver of habitat destruction and ecosystem loss driven by human-induced changes. In addition to that, our current approach to agriculture uses 70% of the fresh water on the planet. Like everything about this is terrible. It's just pile and pile of terrible things. Um, but but yes, when you hear all those predictions about like, oh, 20 years from now we're going to be fighting wars over water because climate change is going to make our endanger a number of our water resources by melting the glaciers that drive the glacial fed rivers, by you know, um, changing the rainfall patterns in a way that there will be droughts and floods at unusual times, et cetera, thereby either making the water supply really scarce or ruining it. When you think about all of that, which is in fact coming, and you think that we're using most of our water, in the agricultural context, yes, it really begs the question: is there another way of doing this that doesn't is not so resource intensive? Also drives the majority of water pollution on the planet, and things like animal agriculture. 94% of the mammal biomass on planet Earth is livestock. That means everything, all other mammals on the planet combined, their biomass is 6% of all mammals. That's, I don't know, that feels like a really big problem to me. Uh, you may have a different threshold. Maybe for you, your tipping point is 96%, but this is not good stuff. All right, so that gives you a little bit of a background as to how the basic function of soil, and then why agriculture is a little screwy right now. But let's jump into a little bit more detail on soil. So this is a little photograph. If you were to take out a shovel of soil, then you might see this different banding happening. So this real dark band at the top, this kind of middle colored band, and then kind of a lighter band, or depending on the soil type, it can be various colors. And what these are referent to are three different, they're called soil horizons. So horizon A is the topsoil. And this is kind of the richest, most life-supporting bits of the soil. This is where a large percentage of the soil ecosystem is taking place in terms of the little critters that are moving around and the microbes that are doing their work. Horizon B is transitional. It's basically the spot that is kind of being broken up by deeper roots, and you actually even see it in the image over here. It's being broken up by deeper roots. It means that some nutrients are going down into those deeper areas, which is allowing the start of that ecosystem that lives off of those plant sugars, and then basically changes the soil to topsoil. And then below that is the underlying substrate. And this is like whatever your geological or mineralogical conditions of your spot on Earth was in the absence of life. So like even in in prior history, like where did these rocks come from? Oh, this was used to be a huge riverbed and it has a bunch of sedimentary rock. That might be in your Horizon C category. Now, this stuff tends to be abiotic. It's deep enough that there is very little life in it. In terms of the gas exchange, in terms of the nutrient exchange, almost nothing is happening here, though life does, find a way to get into all sorts of little niches, but this is a tiny fraction of the activity. And this is kind of like the physical structure of soil. And we'll often refer to that using uh, a, a kind of soil characterization approach like this. And you don't need to get into all the details on this, but like three major components: clay, silt, and sand. And basically they get remixed in various ways, and that defines kind of both the structural properties of Horizon C soil. Like civil engineers like to think about Horizon C soil in terms of, if I put an anchor in the ground, then is it going to stay? Or if I need to build a foundation, then how is it going to hold up? But the interesting stuff biologically is all in Horizon A and Horizon B, because this is where all the healthiest ecosystems happening up in Horizon A. This is that kind of transitional ecosystem where we're trying to go convert Horizon C's substrate into topsoil over time. And if life is given enough time, then Horizon A, gets bigger and bigger. horizon B gets bigger and bigger up through the length of the roots that are supported in that ecosystem, and then horizon C is just beyond the deepest roots. So that's one lens to understand soil one level deeper. Another lens to understand soil a level deeper. And this, I want to share this because this is like the classic agricultural lens. So this is Liebig's law. And it basically says, well, if you're an agricultural producer and your crop has got a certain amount of output right now, then you might want to go look at some of these nutrients and then figure out what is the limiting nutrient. And this is basically, the barrel and staves model from Liebig's law. And what that basically says is the nutrient that you are shortest of, that is going to go determine the level of production in the tank. So like if you were an agricultural producer and things seem to be stopping at a particular level, and then you find you're low on potassium compared to the other things, well, supplementing potassium in inputs might allow you to have a higher production level for your overall field. Now, I mentioned that I'm going to introduce this and almost effectively instantly shoot it down, but I think it's worth sharing because it has defined a lot of our agricultural policy and the way that we've been thinking about agricultural production over the last 50 years or so. And this is a very production input output sensibility of things. You notice here there's no mention of mycorrhizals or the quality or function of soil, much more from just like this flat mineralogical perspective. And we know now that actually that the flat mineralogical perspective is a very limited perspective. It doesn't give us the sense of how the biologics and all the other activities, which are that actually driving the transition from horizon C to B and from B to A, we're not getting any sense of how that is happening in the process when we use these kind of low dimensional models and focus just on the mineralogical content. And also, even the stave model is not perfect, though. It's a fine first pass approximation that gets you pretty close to useful outcomes. But sometimes when you go and supplement something, especially if you over supplement something, like an overabundance of calcium, for example, might lead to a crowding out of of other microbes. So there might be some microbes that love calcium, need calcium, do really well in the presence of that nutrient. And sometimes when you oversupply, it actually creates damage because it damages the microbiome of the soil, and you get less effective absorption of a bunch of these other things. So this kind of, the barrel implies this is kind of just a linear model where you just need to move up the lowest stave. In practice, this is a dynamic nonlinear thing where it really is a mediated through the soil microbiome, and the nonlinear dynamics of the soil microbiome is kind of where the action is at. Cool. All right, with all that, I think you know enough about soil that you need to know. And we're going to pop into what some of this stuff looks like in practice. So these photos are from a visit I did in 2017 to Gabe Brown's farm, Gabe Brown's ranch. And I actually went out there with a team of 4 soil scientists, and we took hundreds of soil cores. And over here is Gabe Brown, and in his right hand, he's got a shovel of soil from his land. And in the other hand, we actually went to his neighbor's farm and took a shovel of dirt. Nobody was there. It was not a problem. He knows his neighbors. I don't even think that's trespassing. Anyway, so but you can see there's a major difference. Like the management techniques are leading to a major difference here. That the health of these soils is visibly different than the health of these other soils, and both of these soils are in farmland that is being actively managed, right? So it's not so much that like, oh, Gabe was able to leave things fallow, and then this other team needed to produce, and that's why theirs is worse off. Actually, Gabe's farm has way more net production per acre than this soil. And they have all been in active use during these time periods. So there's just something different about what's happening here. And I think that's well evidenced by, this is a zoom in of a 4-foot long soil core. And you see this crumbly stuff to the left, and you see the crumbly stuff ends around here and becomes a little bit more solid. this is what the transition spot between Horizon A and Horizon B looks like. And in most of the US, the Horizon A to Horizon B transition is as little as like an inch deep or half an inch deep. That's how much topsoil we have. You know, in really verdant areas, maybe you got a couple inches of topsoil. But like what you're seeing here on Gabe Brown's ranch, 29 inches of Horizon A soil. And this was not an unusual core. I think this is actually pretty close to the average in terms of how much topsoil that he's been able to build over 2 decades, which means that he's been averaging building more than an inch of topsoil per year for those decades. Um, it kind of points in the direction of a very different possibility where you are not necessarily getting some huge economic hit. You actually might be producing more and be much more profitable, but also leaving your land in a state which is dramatically healthy as opposed to this land. Now, I said this land was producing, but actually some of his neighboring farms actually need to stop producing because when I went out there in 2017, they were on the third year of continuous drought. And in the calendar year leading up to our visit, they had had a total of 5.3 inches of rain for the whole year. So yeah, they were in mass drought conditions, you know, for the third year in a row. And yet Gabe's farm was still continuing to produce about 80% of its maximum output, even in the third year of mass drought. And a bunch of his neighboring farms actually just paused. They're like, we can't produce anymore. We got to wait until the rains come back. So that's kind of what it looks like in practice. These are some of the numbers behind it, you know, what's happened for him over these decades. So he inherited this land in 93, and then he started applying some of these techniques. And throughout this, you can see the soil organic matter content increasing. And to understand how much carbon in the soil, then it's a rough approximation, but it's close enough to say that roughly 50% of the organic matter percentage is the soil organic carbon percentage. So anyhow, um, started out at 1.7. He started doing these activities like no-till, because I forgot to mention. So tilling, which is kind of plowing the fields, is one of the most common agricultural activities that is happening all around the world in agriculture. And yet it's one of the most damaging because it basically is constantly tearing up the mycorrhizal systems and the root systems, which basically leads it into a decay cycle. And as it goes into this decay cycle, so like imagine not only are you not feeding this system because you are providing all these fertilizers to this plant and kind of starving out the mycorrhizal ecosystem and the soil ecosystem because of it, you are also now plowing it all and tearing up the actual mycorrhizal connections. So even if they wanted to work, they can't work anymore. And what's perverse about this whole thing is right after you till, you go and tear up all these mycorrhizal networks, and the influx of energy going into that soil ecosystem instantly becomes too low to be able to go support any organisms that are in there because you tore up their communication networks. So even the energies that are hitting the surface can't distribute in the soil effectively. Then what happens with all the things that can't live, given that the amount of energy might be down by 90, 95% after tilling, then all those things rot and they actually generate carbon dioxide and methane. Like we will plow the fields and generate a huge amount of greenhouse gases, as opposed to agriculture is the sort of activity that should fundamentally be sequestering greenhouse gases. So we're doing this hardcore bad. So we're gonna go back to that. Cool. So anyway, so going no-till is a big deal, and you actually see that his organic matter percentage started to creep up. Then he started diversifying the actual crops he was growing, and then started to creep up more. And then he started integrating cover crops in time periods where the cash crop is not, kind of dominating, because there's basically a planting and harvesting season for all the cash crops. During the time period that it is you are not growing the cash crop, then a lot of folks leave their stuff as bare earth, or they rotate in another cash crop. But like what Gabe Brown did was he experimented with a huge variety of cover crop mixes. And these are basically green plants that you can put in the soil during the time period that you're not growing your cash crop, that basically continue to protect the soil from wear erosion and also continue that conveyor belt of sunlight into energy that's driving a healthy soil ecosystem. So even during off season, the cover crops were driving, healthier soil. And then he started experimenting with all different mixes of cover crops. So he had so a lot of times, man, we're getting lots of details. A lot of times you go and buy a cover crop mix and it's just like red clover, or maybe it's like 3 species. Um, Gabe was experimenting with mixes that were up to 130 species in a single mix. And he's like settled and landed on things that are more in like the 60 to 70 species. But in the process of that 60 to 70 species, he's actually basically introducing all the plants that are helping to fix all of this chemistry into the soil. And it's, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then there's livestock integration using intensive rotational grazing, which is basically, that basically accelerated things even further, because ahead of all this, there's no real inputs that are going into the soil. But at the point that you integrate livestock through intensive rotational grazing, you'll have these moments where the livestock are grazing a particular paddock, and they basically leave a bunch of fertilizer in the form of their waste, and they turn the soil in a really useful way. And then when you go and rotate to the next paddock, then they repeat that in the next area. So in that case, he is providing some inputs to the soil, but not inputs that starve out the soil ecosystem. Basically inputs that like, livestock manure has got lots of useful microbes. Some of them are going to have a long life in the soil, after they hit the ground. And also, it's not like a broad application of fertilizer, which then cuts off all the nutrient cycle through the mycorrhizals. Anyway, you can see he goes from 1.7% up to 11% in just a couple of decades, in 2 decades. And of course, he's beyond that now. He's north of 13%. We were out there in 2017, so numbers were higher than this. Yes, so really, really amazing progress in a short amount of time. And actually, I'm going to pull sideways very quickly into this other talk, because I think it's worthwhile to mention at this moment. Oh, and I'm supposed to stop because I'm 4 minutes over. This is great. And even this is not the talk. Where's the other talk? Here we go. So check this out. Because if you look at what has happened, so this is how much carbon was in the atmosphere historically. Then we added this much since the Industrial Revolution, and that's basically driving the climate destabilization we're experiencing. The amount in the biospheres, this much, soil carbon is this much, but like, look at how much carbon is in the soil compared to, these amounts we've been adding to the atmosphere, the amounts we've been adding to the ocean. It dwarfs this stuff. And right now, global soils are coming in, somewhere between 0.5% to 1.5%, soil organic carbon. And if you could double this, just imagine doubling that number and how big that would actually be too much. That would absorb way more carbon than we want. But if we were to limit it just to the land that we actively farm, and you could get even a third of the way that that Gabe Brown was able to get in 20 years, that would also pay off the trillion tons of excess carbon dioxide that we put into the atmosphere. So I think that's enough because I'm 4 minutes over. We're gonna stop. And was there anything else? Oh man, there was a lot. Well, whatever. We'll talk about some stuff.
Tom, I think we're going to open it up to questions.
Yeah, let's ask a question. Sorry about that.
I think if you want to raise your hand or just speak up if you have a question.
So I'm curious for you, what do you think are some of the top interventions that are needed now in order to help scale the whole regenerative agriculture industry? I know we had spoken a couple years ago about soil sensors being one of the kind of key roadblocks.
Well, one of the main things in the US is you need to change the farm bill. You need to change the farm bill so it doesn't incentivize, heavy input monocropping, because that's basically also a recipe for terrible soil. And right now, there's a perverse incentive in the farm bill that basically says, hey, you're not able to get farm insurance unless you follow industry best practice. And basically industry best practice is soil destroying. Now, how did we get to industry best practice being soil destroying? Man, I'm not sure how much people want to know about this stuff. Like there's a system of land grant universities that are typically what the big companies, the big ag players like a Monsanto or Cargill or whatever, kind of lean on in order to go do their ag research. But they are the funders of that research. So they it's not that they own these research teams, but they fund the research that they ask these research teams to do. And that basically allows them to cherry pick the papers that come back that say that their products work really well. And then they go take those papers to the legislators and say, like, guys, you need to legislate that people need to use our products because that's the best way to get agricultural outcomes. But they're not thinking about soil health. They're not thinking about any of the things that we spent this whole conversation on. And therefore, we've kind of enshrined into law that you need to go follow those in order to get farm insurance. And if you don't get farm insurance, then you are literally betting the farm every year. Like every year that you go out there, maybe the weather's bad, maybe there's, the frost comes too early, maybe some other thing happens. You might literally go out of business. So people feel really tied to needing to meet the requirements of farm insurance. And to the extent that you can, man, this one answer is so long. In truth, healthier soils should be lower cost to insure because they're more resilient in all ways. And that is not the economic dynamic that is enforced by the regulation. It's the exact opposite. So we need to at least change that. And then there's 50 other changes. I'm going to stop. Yeah.
Tom, it's Michael Perman. I have a question. I noticed that General Mills is devoting 1 million acres of regenerative land, I think by 2030. And I presume it's primarily around oats. Beyond sort of the governmental incentive, what do you think it takes to prove the economic model for scaled up farming at that level, the major food manufacturing level, for them to get on board?
Well, I mean, you mentioned General Mills, and General Mills is obviously a food company, and they want to go source quality ingredients to put into their food. And one thing that General Mills noticed some years ago, really more than 5 years ago, was that there was this emerging divergence between, um, you know, um, organic agricultural production and organic agricultural demand. So like a lot of people wanted to go buy products that used organically grown ingredients inside of it, and it was outstripping how much production was happening by a factor of 3 or more. And given like the future of their business depends on being able to go and source the ingredients that they can put into the food that people want to buy, then they got real interested in the farming sector and they started to ask the question like, what can we do in this ecosystem that would, in the farming ecosystem, the economic ecosystem, not the actual outdoor ecosystem, to kind of spur more organic farming at a scale that would be relevant to the food sourcing side of the business. And that's a whole long conversation too, if you want to have it. But like, I think that, what we're seeing here is that the movement of how people want to eat is leading everything. Like people are changing how they want to eat. And then farming, has got like the old school incentives, as typified by, the big ag players kind of dictating a way of growing, and the stuff that's kind of encoded in the farm bill and parallels of the farm bill in other countries, because every country's got its kind of its own version of it, right? And all the big ag players like try to get into those regulators to do the same playbook in all of those countries. So that whole long discussion there. But moving like we're seeing that consumer desire is leading some companies who need to source those ingredients to begin investing in alternative approaches to the agriculture, which is diverging from the incentives that a government might have under the influence of the corporate interest of big ag. And I think that's beginning to start the thing. I don't think we're going to get 100% of the way there, but with just that mechanism alone, but I do applaud them for a number of early experiments in the field, and they do seem very committed. And also companies like Danone, and there's a couple, right?
Once you get at scale, transitioning from a 1-inch topsoil to whatever 10, 15, 20 inches, is the cost per acre of production already beneficial over a till and fill kind of methodology?
Man, these are the slides that I skipped. Okay, I'm going to show you a thing real quick. Jeez,
Okay.
of course. These are
Oh, so while
very good
Tom
ways.
is
Yeah.
doing that, so we spent a lot of time in the past few years going to conferences like Practical Farmers of Iowa and Moses and Minnesota Organics, and it's it's positive today. Farmers change their behavior slowly,
Uh-huh.
and you need to have those early adopters. Remember, the USDA found that out back in the 30s, and you have to look at what the early adopters are doing. And even around here, in the monocropping stuff, they're starting to use no-drill planters and not farming naked. It's a really mixed thing, right? Because a lot of the agricultural production does not go into local food; it goes overseas. There's a lot of moving pieces here, but sorry. Anyway, there's a lot of encouraging signs, and the technology is there, and once the farmers see it, they know it works. But it's hard to change a big scale farming operation. It takes a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can go read about this study. This was done on a corn production, though, man, there's so much sub detail to get into because you got your big commodity crops like your corn and your wheat and your soy, and then you got your specialty crops, and what they call specialty crops are almost all the produce we eat. So things like artichokes and garlic and celery and whatever, that's all specialty crops. Like,
Hmm.
they're not these large commodity grains or other commodity crop, like soy is a commodity protein. Anyway, they basically, this is a study that went and looked at people that were doing any sort of regenerative soil stuff, whether it is no-till, low-till, as just mentioned.
Hmm.
And it basically goes across a interesting N of farmers that are doing any sort of thing. And then they basically find a farm that is geographically almost next door. So it basically has got all the same climatic conditions, growing the same crop, and they do a head-to-head with kind of the partner pair across
Hmm.
like 36 points where here's 36 farmers that are doing at least one regenerative practice compared to a neighbor farmer. So
Hmm.
these are not people that are even taking it all the way to the extreme that, like a Brown's Ranch or some of the other folks, um, Marin Carbon Farms, like they're not taking it to the absolute extreme. They're just practicing at least one soil regenerative practice. And
Okay.
you can see the difference in net profit is already material. And they also break down exactly where so this white bar is the net profit.
Oh, I
And then
see.
these are cost drivers up here.
Okay.
Um,
Wow.
Anyway, now I'm just going to say though, just to be totally fair, the stuff it depends on the crop, it depends on the situation, and this is part of why this has been a harder nut to crack because you need to be ready and excited to like dig into some of the details of each of these major crop types and some of the actual practical regenerative soil practices that are going to help them sooner than later. Because if you had like five regenerative practices you could take on, then depending on the crop type, maybe approach number one is the most effective for crop type A, but then approach number three is going to get you the most bang for the buck if you only had $10 to spend for crop type B, and ergo like some of these things that are a little bit more as a function of context. I'll pause for a second. Sorry I didn't get to the end of the presentation, but it's all good. If you saw the thing in the corner, you can go and read you can screen cap that or look at it in the recording and go read the paper on it too. It's totally good.
Tom, if you want to take us through the rest of the presentation, I'm not sure how long it is, but.
Oh, nice. That's great. Ta-da. This is me doing it wrong and getting a second chance. Okay. So we talked about this. That's cool. This is a study from Berkeley, and it basically shows both the private and public benefits. So this is the private means the benefit to the farmer, public benefit, the societal benefit. And when you practice good, regenerative soil agriculture, then the farmer gets these, local benefits to the ecology of their farm, and then they get these economic benefits to their production, and society gets these benefits. And so this is just to say there's massive co-benefits here, both on the farm and downstream. Um, and carbon is the name of the game, for a lot of folks these days. And I think it's very important to talk about because we're obviously imbalanced in terms of global carbon emissions. But I think like the improvement to healthy hydrology, the improvement to resilience of, the cropland where we're growing our food, all these other co-benefits are equally as important to quality of life as like trying to track the carbon side. Though I do also believe that there's still fantastic potential in terms of using soil differently, having a different relationship with soil that is going to lead to some benefits on the carbon side as well. Oh yeah, I actually put this question in the deck. That's cool. People ask that question later. Here's more data. So I showed you some of the data. I think this is for wheat, and it's basically showing you, I believe so. This is for wheat, and it's basically showing you the benefit of different practices. And then this is for corn, and it's showing you, the study that I mentioned before. And feel free to screen cap that and look at that paper, or screen cap this, and that one I made a tiny URL for. Oh, sorry, this is soy then, because it says in the tiny URL. But corn and soy is, yeah, a lot of economic production there. Wheat is also huge, but whatever. Rice is also huge, but grown in a different way. Let's not get into details about rice. It's fine. And then one thing that was crazy in this same study that you saw here is they actually, like a bunch of the regenerative folks stopped using pesticides with the intensity, and some of them stopped using pesticides at all because some of them moved over to organic agriculture, and some organic practices overlap with soil regenerative practices. There's a lot of overlap really. So they kind of started doing a bunch of these soil regenerative things as they moved over to organic. And what was interesting was that the cornworm abundance, so this is like a worm that like hangs out near the roots and generates all this trouble. Basically, there was actually more pests in the situation where they applied pesticides. And why is this the case? It's because the pesticides literally kill everything. And it also it kills the competing beneficial organisms that would compete with these cornworms. And as much as like, the big ag companies have basically sold us as like, oh, we can't successfully grow food for the future unless we're applying all that pesticide. This would say something different, actually. This is saying that you're actually ending up with more of the pests that you're worried about because of the application of pesticides, and that a healthy soil ecosystem would have saved you a lot of money compared to just applying more pesticides. Oh man, now we're getting to too much data. Okay, we should stop. Okay. Oh no, I guess I can say one other thing about this, which is when Trump was elected and we pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, there was a bunch of cities and states in the US that said, hey, we're actually going to stay in Paris. And actually what that meant is they went and set aggressive targets for themselves. And some of them are actively looking at biological sequestration as one of the mechanisms to be able to go hit their aggressive targets. So, all right, that's enough for that. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, Leon has a question.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, Tom. So I kind of want to zoom out a little bit and pick your brain on process in terms of innovation and collab. I know we both previously crossed paths for tackling redefining flexible films in the plastic pollution space, and curious, from your experience at Google X, from your experience at Marina Rainchild's Innovation Collab around that topic, what do you think are models that we need to lean into in the future to really tackle regenerative ag and what that should look like?
Yeah, so there's a macro set of changes that need to happen in the regulatory side. Oh man, there's so many things to go say about all these things. Okay, I'm going to show you one other thing. This is going to be great. Man. We're first going to exit out of this thing, and then we're going to pop over. No. Oh yeah, this is this thing. So first off, you got to understand that there's actually not just one world of agriculture. There's at least three. And oh yeah, here we go. So like if you look at these purple areas, This basically shows what the agriculture becomes. And you see these purple areas. In the US, we're actually mostly growing to produce animal feed and biofuels, which is crazy town. And then in the developing world, we are doing a lot to actually grow food that people eat. So half of the world's food is provided by these small landholder farmers in the developing world that are basically growing for the billions that live in this area. And then the developed world has a similar, generates a lot of, generates about the same amount of food, but it also generates a lot of commodity agriculture, and it pushes all this stuff into fuel and feed. Now, to go answer your question, then you kind of need to divide up each one of these lines, because you need to say, what happens to the future of agriculture for the stuff that we're just using as a pure commodity, the stuff that's going to feed and fuel? What happens to the stuff that is in the modern, agricultural stuff and that gets eaten by people? And then, the third route is what happens, to modern agriculture that is done by small landholder farmers, at like a 1/2 acre to 5 acre scale and like feeds local people. And really, what it means to get to a scalable model in all three of those areas is totally different. So like, maybe I'm just introducing the problem at more depth, and I can go into a little bit of early thoughts on how you tackle all those things differently, but I did want to kind of lay the groundwork of, yes, the complexity is at least that much more nuanced, because those three are very different. Within those three, then there's a lot of sub branches and all that sort of thing. At the very high level, in the developed world, a lot of the farmers are on the older side. Average age of farmers in the US in like the late 50s kind of zone, like, 58. Um, and, there's actually been fewer young people going into farming. So the name of the game has been consolidation, automation. And look, there's human tolls to this as well. Like there's a lot of farming families that are put out of business and have stopped growing, or like their kids go away from the farm because it just doesn't make sense for them to run as a business anymore. So like the interventions there to go change that trajectory end up being about like, how do you invigorate a new class of farmers? How do you use the tools in concert with humans as opposed to, instead of humans? And how do you go do that in service of a more just food system that is going to provide like the quality of food and level of nutrients to all the places that need it? And that's a different set of questions than in the developing world, where a lot of those farmers' average age are younger. And you might go and actually, this is my parents. Like my mom used to like manage the water buffalo for the family farm, and this is when she was a kid. So yeah, by the time she went to college or whatever, she is out of that. My dad was also in farming. By the time he went to college, he's out of that. And in a lot of the developing world, if you have another job that you can do by the time you get to your 20s or whatever, a lot of people move out of farming, but they might start in farming as a farming family. So it's a different sort of situation out there where the people that want to continue to be family farmers and want to expand your operations, you got to approach them a particular way. The folks that are kind of transitional farmers, where they're farming just by necessity, out of they happen to be born in this place in the world and you need to grow to live, then like actually a lot of them will not grow, right? Because we'll figure out ways to get to the scale without them having to feel like, because my parents actually felt like they sacrificed like a half a decade of their life, or more, to doing work, which is basically manual labor work on a farm. And eventually they did other stuff in their jobs. And look, I'm not saying that that is not great work. For a subset of people, that's exactly what they want to do. But then for definitely a lot of the folks in that's feeding half of the world in these 1/2 acre to 5 acre farms, that is not actually what they're trying to do for their whole lives. So you got to go consider that as well. I'm going to pause for a second because this is like a very deep design question. I'm just laying out the groundwork a little bit. And in each one of these areas, there's so much design work, so much listening and conversation to be had.
No, I totally appreciate that. And I think it's super important to know the entry points and the leverage points. And I agree, there's so much we can talk about in terms of how do we actually, create the operating system around how does that innovation process work and the connections, and to actually drive those levers forward. I guess for the rest of the folks here, I'm kind of curious if you could share a few learnings from the RFF Innovation Workshop that we ran for half a year, like kind of what you think could be iterated on that model and scale in this space, or maybe other spaces, if that is actually modular and applicable to other industries, or
Okay,
even
I'm going to
your
do a
learning
couple
from
things. So I'm pasting a link into the chat, which is the longer version of the talk that I just like showed you a slide from. And that really starts to break out like in the branches of developing world, developed world, commodities market, what you do. And that's how I know I can't say it in a very short amount of time, because in that talk, I like take 37 minutes to go say what I just started to say. And it's like, uh-oh, we better stop. And then, and, you know, relative to answering your question real directly in the short term, if we're talking about the US, we need some regulatory changes, because the landscape is tilted against this stuff in a way that is damaging to the soil and in preference of big industry. So you need to level the playing field. I'm not even saying like advantage of the small farmers. Let's just level it out a bit. And then, um, you know, underneath this umbrella, you need a couple different things. There are some things around better tools. And as a technologist, as a tool maker, then great. That's the stuff that is easy for me. I'm more attracted to it. That's great. I'm going to say that is only a tiny piece of it though, right? So we need better tools to like help people automatically understand their soils, like, you know, build a more nuanced relationship to them and make better management decisions, right? But like, I'm going to say that's just one thing under this umbrella. Another thing under the umbrella is basically the community and educational support. Because if you've been farming a particular way and your way of farming has been really focused on input management or equipment management, like, you know, like tractors and implement kind of management, then you're not in the guts of soil regenerative agriculture, you know, educationally at the level that you're going to be able to engage, you know, with confidence, especially with something that's economically important to you. So you definitely want to go and build those sort of like co-education, mentoring, sharing networks. And farmers have a bunch of these already, you know, trading like, oh, this tip on how to use this tractor, or, you know, whether this vendor is good or not, but like really invigorating that in the soil regenerative, you know, side of the house. And then the last thing is, you know, as mentioned before, the General Mills comment, it's actually very helpful if there are players at the other end that are basically guaranteeing a buy of the better produced uh, produce. And if you do that, you basically have an economic guarantee that you'll be able to sell your output at a higher price than what you're currently getting for your crop. You know, you would have the educational support and a community around you that are helping you get up to speed in a short amount of time. And you might have some of the tools that just simplify the management tasks or reduce the labor on the management tasks or improve your understanding or improve the nuance of your understanding for a amount of time. And imagine all three of those things happen underneath a regulatory umbrella that has just leveled the playing field. Yes, I think those are kind of the preconditions, and I'm not even talking about what the practical full playthrough looks like, but you gotta get those things in play. Am I ruining the schedule here? Because I know I'm way past the run sheet. Yes.
We changed the run show. We're emergent.
Oh, sorry, Forrest has got a question. Go for it.
I got a question. So to change lanes and back to kind of the content of the week, how can the traditional artists in the room, how can those of us who deal in creativity to support these very interesting, different thinking topics, how can we support you? What can the artists do to help folks like you who, I mean, you're across platform. I've followed your career. I love what you're doing. How can those of us who draw well, who design well, who make things well, how can we support you? What can we do?
Well, I mean, first off, I think we just need to improve the quality of this conversation overall. So the fact that you guys are listening to stuff like this, if you want to, you know, watch the other talk that's in the chat, or you want to go and look up some of the other resources that are referred to, because all my slide decks have like the scientific or resource, you know, reference at the bottom whenever I'm like referring to somebody else's data or work. And I'm happy to go send the presentations around. You can go and just dig into the data behind all this stuff. And I wrote a white paper about this about a year and a half ago or something. and that has got crazy number of citations. So there's lots of places to go start to just learn, get more up to speed on it. I think like real potent stuff is happening. Like the Farm Bill is being drafted this year, and it's going to be voted on in 2022. So it's like, yeah, this is a real interesting year to try to do some stuff. And in a separate, avenue, I've been speaking with folks in the government of Canada to see if we can incentivize soil regenerative agriculture for that whole country. And imagine you could get the US and Canada into a different spot on this stuff. Those are 2 out of the 3 biggest countries in the world, right? It's like, or actually US is, no, that US is just a little bit bigger than China. China's number 4. Yeah, so it's 2 out of the 3. So it's like, man, that would be huge in terms of the actual surface area of agriculture beginning to be managed differently, and that could set the tone for the whole world.
Tom, I had a quick question. Can we share your regenerative ag paper with the folks in the?
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about. Go ahead and share it. I don't care.
Okay.
I mean, I care a lot, but like share it to read the stuff and then learn how to do the stuff you want to do on it.
Excellent. And we have Sycamore Tyler he has another question.
Thanks, Faith. And thanks, Tom, for your work in bridging these worlds. It's so important to give people this base level of knowledge. As a brief response to Forrest, like partner with farms, actually help these farmers get their word out there. I'm too busy like in the garden, in the forest to actually market the products, design the website, build the graphics, like actually having this passion, having this care. And I'm curious about, Tom, your work with water vapor as a greenhouse gas. To me, it feels like carbon dioxide is hyped because of the technological and global control mechanisms that are helpful to quantify it all. But as to actually rebuilding our watersheds, or Ben Goldfarb's book on beavers says that the square area of New Mexico and Arizona used to be underwater in the United States with regard to beaver ponds, and the capacity of those kinds of things to store carbon. And so just curious about your work beyond carbon when it comes to regenerative agriculture, and if you see any promising work with that field of study as well.
Yeah, you're pointing at something that's real interesting. And if you have heard about what people are saying about mangroves and seagrasses and wetlands and all that sort of thing, it's all in the same category as the beaver dams. And that being like, if you can get stable pools of water that help to enable anoxic decay toward the bottom layers, then it's able to basically create the formation of histosols, which are extremely carbon intensive soils. So yes, us going around the world and ruining all the hydrological cycles and draining the wetlands and clearing the mangroves and killing all the beavers for pelts, and we kind of blew it. We did like 10 bad things. So don't undo those things. Yes. Thank you for that. That is an important piece of the equation. And like agriculture is, it's a thing that has got an economic lens. So it's nice in that the current world, for better or worse, like all speaks the language of economy. So to the extent that we can introduce some changes through something where we have a common language through economy, then great. When it comes to like wetlands or restoring beavers to their natural habitats, or like changing how we do hydroelectric, so we get like more true to how natural systems want to work around the hydrological cycles, like those are the sorts of things that do not speak the language of economy quite as well, because people are like, why do I want a swamp here? Like I'd rather drain it and have a hotel. That's economic. And it's like, oh no. So like that's actually maybe another thing that the artists can do, right? Like how can you create something if it's not going to be an economic narrative for things like wetland protection or restoration, you know hi- you know mangroves, seagrasses, beavers, all these sorts of things, then what is the poetry? Like what is the stuff that gets us re-inspired about it? And there's this great, I think it was on Invisibilia or Radiolab, but there's this great program about how nobody cared about saving the whales until this person like recorded their songs and started releasing their songs. And then when they realized that whales like actually sung different songs from each other, and they shared songs with each other, and that there's like depth and meaning to their songs, all of a sudden it stopped being like an industrial source of blubber. They're like, holy shit, like that's an amazing thing. What are we doing to this thing? And that to me is an example of poetry, right? Like it's not like the whales were economically worth more because of their songs. It's just we understood their poetry, and then we decided like maybe let's not kill everybody. And I think there's poetry to be had in all of these places where the ecosystem can restore itself as well. But we're mostly talking about in these economic terms. Like here's how many hectares of mangroves that were cleared last month. And it's like, I don't know, man. Is that poetry? Do I hear the song of the mangroves inspiring me, bringing me back to life? No, I hear you feeling very sad, and I understand you're sad, and your hyper logic is a cover for grief, and it's all okay.
Thank you.
Uh, there's all kinds of nascent tries at creating a carbon market, and that's being reignited. The last one I went through was the CCX that failed because the metrics were not there. Is there accurate, precise, and cost-effective metrics to support a market so price discovery can be developed and support the trade between a willing buyer and a willing seller?
I'm glad you brought it up. And CCX, you know, as you well know, and you were involved in, one of the most ambitious carbon markets ever tried. So, but yeah, what you said around the cost of measurement of the stuff in the market, because imagine you couldn't just measure, you know, imagine the value of a stock just wasn't like boom, instantly available. Imagine like whenever you wanted to go measure the value of this asset that you had bought, it like was as expensive as the asset itself. And ergo our problem around, you know, working out how to do a carbon market, you know, at any interesting scale. And but before we, okay, so there's a near-term issue. The near-term issue is like if you want to successfully run a carbon market and you want to penalize folks for, you know, using carbon in the wrong ways and reward folks for doing the right things with carbon, then yes, you need to measure this stuff accurately and be able to go and economically incent, you know, the incentivize those things. And so there's a near-term piece of work around what does it look like for us to improve our measurement tools so the cost of measurement gets low enough that you can support a market with it? If the cost of measurement is similar to the share price of the stock, then that's disastrous, right? Like whenever anybody even wants to look at the thing, they're like, oops, cost me the whole value I was going to put into the thing, right? And I'm using that as a metaphor, but it's actually not super off the mark. Like if you really want to get a deep understanding of how much carbon is in a, you know, 1,000-hectare plot, then you're out there doing tons of soil samples and doing lots of lab spins and doing all, it's like, it is actually a pretty expensive operation, more than you would be paid from the carbon markets, you know, for what you had done. So like there is the shrinking of that ratio. So like the measurement becomes a fraction of the value of the asset being created. And that's kind of the near-term issue to go work on. But the bigger term issue, and this is one that's raised by Charles Eisenstein and other folks, who's another speaker in this whole series. It's great. You know, it's like there's things that you quantify, and after you quantify them, then we start to treat them like we treat everything else in the market. And it means that like, oh, well, during the time period where it's more economical to help the soil and, you know, build these communities, then let's do it. Oh, and then when the economics turn toward it's better to destroy the soil and destroy these communities, we'll just keep doing it. So I think there is like, you know, there is a near-term tactical question to go solve about changing the ratio of the cost of measurement of carbon in biological sinks, whether it's soil or trees or ecosystems broadly, you know, marine ecosystems. Lots of places where we've had challenges actually just measuring that accurately at a low enough cost ratio to the price of the asset. But then there's a macro issue of like, do you want to assetify all these things? And are we the civilization that is responsible enough that if we make them into assets that would do the right thing with them? Or if it becomes more economic to kill all of the life and destroy all the soils, does the fact that we assetified it actually work against us? Now, I don't want to presume that it's all going to be terrible out the gate, but I do want to raise it early on, because lots of ways that we could steer it to disaster. And it's useful to know early on some of the disaster scenarios. So you're like, oh, I'll just avoid that whole disaster cluster here and go a little bit more in this direction.
Do you think that's really a risk when you talked about all the externalities and the codependencies of having healthy soil with ag
The reason that I
production
think it's a
and with
risk,
soil, or with watersheds, with wildlife, with soil life, etc.? You think that, so better shut up, let you answer that.
the reason I think it's a risk is that there is a huge push for these things that are called DAFs that were investing in these special economic zones. So and basically there was a law passed a couple years ago that basically said, hey, if you invest in these zip codes and these communities that have been historically underinvested, then you get this major win. You don't need to pay any capital gains tax on your earnings as long as you've held that investment for more than 10 years. And there's basically, the gist behind it is there's all these underinvested parts of the nation. And wouldn't it be great if private investors got real incentivized to go and put money into these underinvested places? And so now prima facie, something like that did happen, which is a bunch of moneyed people started looking at these zip codes that had not had very much investment and started asking themselves the question, oh, what does it look like to put capital to work here? But on the flip side of this, and this gets to the whole kind of slippery slope about assetification, I don't even know if that's a word, but you guys know what I'm talking about, is that because the moneyed interest behind it did not have a fundamental care about improving those communities, they had way more care about the avoiding of capital gains tax, then they were looking for what is the least hard way to get that benefit? And that led them to not solve some of the important problems, not go after the places that really needed help, just were, competing over what's a layup. And yeah, that's the danger in acidifying a thing. This is a long and deep topic. Sorry to have to give you such a short take on it. Cool. Anybody else? Wait, when are we supposed to go until? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dean. Go for it.
Peace. This is a very good topic. And I hope to have some input and extraction into physicality that is in a current market monetizable through carbon that doesn't have anything to do with the current system that is set up, but because of the ability to extract its essence out of the oxygen into a solid form, that is going to be the basics of, well, like all the new capacitors that are coming online for the new electrical systems, etc. It all comes out of the process that we can take out of the oxygen. So we have an opportunity to laterally monetize what we're doing in the next 10 years, as well as change the agricultural systems. We've already done it in China. We already have the research, and so we're ready to rock and roll. I have your information. Little information about me is I started this vision or this journey when Buckminster first put it out in black and white on television. And I've been on it since then, researching, creating, and developing. As I enter into this, I have a real big handicap. I am extremely brilliant, but extremely dyslexic. And when I bring something, some will be theory, but most of it will have already been put into physicality.
Great. Yeah.
Okay.
No, thank you for the intro, and you've got, you know, access to my contact and also the whole BFI, you know, team here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and we're interested in trying to go publish something that will help a lot of other people think about this clearly. This is kind of the whole gist of the cooperating manual.
Well, when
You muted yourself, but that's exactly the thing that we're trying to work on here. Yes.
Okay. As it's put into physicalness, I have a machine that will process 50 cubic yards a day. So we're already in the ability to produce the physicality of the medium. Okay, and this physicality is aerobically digested material, any type of carbon sink. That's one of the processes. And it is a perfect carrier for any type of fungal product that can be then put into the soil as a regenerative, as a quick regenerative.
Right.
And then,
so you're basically priming it with different sorts of mycorrhizals and fungi, and then you basically created a physical substrate that easily can be inoculated and carry a lot of it.
Right, at a very, very low price per ton.
Cool.
Okay.
Dean, is it possible for you to follow up with BFI and Tom at another time? I just want to be really
Yes. Oh, thank you. Peace.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. And Tom, I don't know if you have any more time, but I just wanted to let people go that are needing to get off here. And I just want to say thank you to you, Tom. It's, you know, so many of us have learned so much during this session, far more than we even thought we would learn, actually. As Jalen was saying, he's learned more about regenerative ag in this last hour and a half than he had for a while. So I think it was really, really incredible to have you on today. And we're so lucky to have you as our fearless leader in so many ways.
I'm not sure if I'm fearless, and I'm pretty sure you do most of the work. So, okay, but I'll take it. Thank you.
Part of the team, at least.
Yes, it's great.
Yeah, and in terms of inputting into the cooperating manual, we didn't get to do that so much during this session. I think it's an ongoing thing that will happen with the community, and we'll be inputting into the cooperating manual on a weekly basis. And Jalen can talk about that quickly before we hop off.
Yeah, well, again, as she said, thanks so much, Tom. And thank all of you for holding space and asking the great questions and some of the things you've already added to the cooperating manual. It has been very enlightening, and I'm sure we're all a little bit brighter and a little bit more inspired of the possibilities. To do that, again, you would just check out Spaceship Earth.live and be able to add those resources there, as well as you can join our BFI community by just checking out bfi.org, becoming a member there, and or joining our high-low community. So we really appreciate you all taking the time and staying over extra. And if you have any other resources or insights you would like to add, you can feel free to add them at other sessions in this awesome event, but also on the website as well. I think Brian, you've been off mute. I wondered if you have a question or anything. Wow.
No question, just brilliant to be here and to catch the final remarks of the conversation. Sorry I was late, but wonderful to see you, Tom, and team.
Awesome. Well, yeah, no, this has been super powerful.
Everybody should look at the Blue Carbon chapter and Spaceship Earth.live, because we're going to make a bunch of chapters, and that was just the one about blue carbon. But we're
Amazing.
going to fill out everything.
We'll be building a chapter on regenerative ag in the next couple months. And then we'll be hosting these member events on a weekly basis. So do become a member if you aren't one already. And it helps us to continue on with these community meetups and have incredible speakers like Tom and programs like the Design Science Studio. So we appreciate all of you, and come back. Keep joining these sessions for the Design Science Studio Summit. There's so many different presentations, talks, dance, music, all different kinds of events happening for the rest of the week until Sunday. So enjoy yourselves, and yeah, come back. Thank you.
And remember, we can't cooperate without you. So
cooperators are standing by, as Amanda says.
A question on submitting records. If there's time constraints, would you prefer folks to just drop the resource link into the Airtable, or is it better to go through and actually tag thoroughly for the first time around?
I think it's better if you tag thoroughly. If you want to put a link into the chat here, Jalen and I can tag team it and put it in.
Just clarifying for the group, just because I think it's nice to have like maybe a different form for each, just so people can kind of, if they have more time, they can take in whatever the quick links are and actually more thoroughly go through and tag. That way you don't have a mix of data in the core Airtable.
I think that's a fantastic suggestion. So yeah, we'll definitely follow it up.
Yeah, on that note, I would love to think about this. And Tom, I've been thinking about you and like what is the user interface to make this accessible for someone who is in need trying to find, and how that kind of, we've been running an experiment on Clubhouse, just collecting and crowdsourcing. I have hundreds of links of entities of best practices for regenerative future, and to Brian, or I'm sorry, was it Leon's point of like that data entry. So we have kind of these, just deconstructing that. I would really like to think about that some more, and what are the tools that have come online recently, i.e. like Rome Research and other things that have allow for easy access and ultimately, because the question that we had was, what's the most accessible portal that we could make for people? Because you could send all of this information, and there's so much information. I'm thinking like the library of the UN for humanity, but the only way you can access that is by being a UN member. And yes, there's tons of information there, but how do you find it? So would love to do a brainstorm and a deep dive on that, and come up with what is it? How do we translate this data into usability for all, as accessible for all? So.
Well, Tyler, we're holding our first session on April 6th, so you should definitely come to that.
Sign me up. And thank you all so much for having this. I just love that all these minds are on a screen right now. So appreciate you, and yeah, you guys are doing such great work. So
maybe we can all come off mute and just say thank you to Tom. I think it's been an incredible session. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you,
Amazing.
Thank you all.
Sorry we can't
Amazing
cover much, but
perspectives.
it's fine. There's a lot more in there. Read the paper.